The potatoes were cooling fast. I could see the steam fading as I stood at the sink, scrubbing the last bit of grease off my hands. Behind me, the kitchen clock ticked like it had somewhere to be. My mother's voice floated in from the dining room, just a reminder to set the butter dish before sitting. I dried my hands, took a deep breath, and walked toward the table like someone stepping onto a stage without a script. Dinner, like always, was arranged with quiet precision. For plates, cloth napkins folded the same way, forks aligned at exactly the same angle. Ryan was already in his seat, polishing his fork with the edge of his hoodie sleeve, humming something that sounded like the opening credits of his favorite sci-fi show. My dad, seated at the head of the table, took a sip of sweet tea and gave Ryan a look of mild amusement, one of those looks that said, "That's my boy," without needing the words. My mom passed the cornbread triangles, all facing the same direction, like they were auditioning for a Southern cookbook. I waited. Not for permission, exactly, but for space. That little lull between bites, the moment when no one was talking, yet no one was listening either. My fingers gripped the edge of the table beneath the cloth. My heart pounded like it was making a final plea, but when I opened my mouth, my voice was calm. I got the state scholarship. Silence. Not the kind that's full of awe, just the kind that flattens a room. My dad looked up, not surprised. Just slightly inconvenienced, like I'd interrupted a program he was watching. "You mean that essay thing?" he asked, already halfway back to his plate. "No," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "It's a full ride. Tuition, housing, meals, all for years." Ryan blinked and dropped his fork. "That's cool, I guess." Mom smiled, tight-lipped. "That's very ambitious, honey. Maybe you can use some of that energy to help Aunt Lynn with baking season. She really needs help in November." I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard right. "But this is college." Dad set his fork down. "Girls don't need that much education, Claire. Especially not to raise a good family." The mashed potatoes tasted like paste after that. I nodded, even though nothing in me agreed. I chewed, swallowed, smiled on cue. I'd worked for that scholarship in secret, studying by flashlight after chores, writing drafts in the margins of notebooks, whispering arguments aloud while stacking hay. And now I was being told I'd gotten all I needed. Then, as if to seal the moment, Dad reached under the table and pulled out a box wrapped in metallic blue paper. He slid it to Ryan. "What's this?" Ryan asked, already tearing into it. "A little something," Dad said. "For saying you wanted to be a game developer. That's vision." Inside was a new iPod, the sleek kind Ryan had been ogling at the electronics store just last month. His eyes lit up like Christmas. I watched him unwrap the headphones, nod along to the future already playing in his head. No essays, no grades. Just a dream and the right gender. I excused myself quietly after dinner. Didn't slam my chair, didn't stomp up the stairs. That wasn't how you survived in our house. I walked to my room, opened my closet, and pulled out the envelope I had hidden beneath two sweaters, the one with the scholarship letter and the newspaper clipping, my name bold under Top Youth Scholars in Colorado. I had cut the edges clean, underlined my name, and tucked it away like it was sacred. I slid the envelope back into place and let the closet door close with a soft click. It sounded like finality. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, fingers curling into the quilt my grandmother stitched before her hands got too stiff to hold a needle. My eyes burned, but it wasn't sadness anymore. Not really. It was the chill of being unseen, like shouting into fog. That was the night I understood. Not just that I was overlooked or dismissed or underestimated. I realized I had never really been seen at all. They had seen a daughter, a helper, a background figure. They had seen future birthday cakes and Christmas table settings. They hadn't seen the hours I stayed up reading under the covers, or the way I kept my grades folded like armor inside my backpack. They hadn't seen my hunger for learning, for space, for something outside this small fenced world. I didn't cry. Not then. I lay back, pulled the quilt up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling until the shadows settled. Some families are built like puzzles, and some are built like walls. Ours was the second kind, and I was starting to see the cracks. The elevator chimed with a polite ding as the doors opened to the 11th floor. I stepped out into the stillness of Greaves' law office, where everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. It was the kind of place that made grief feel official, like something you had to sign off on in triplicate. The receptionist greeted me with a soft, practiced smile and offered water I didn't take. I sat in the waiting area for 5 minutes, maybe 10, surrounded by framed diplomas and photos of Mr. Greaves shaking hands with people in suits. The weight of what was coming hadn't hit me yet, but something in the way my palms stayed damp told me my body already knew. They called us in together. Dad, Mom, Ryan, and me. The conference room looked more like a museum than a place where hearts get broken. Dark wood table. Brass light fixtures. A decanter of water sweating quietly in the middle like it was nervous too. Greaves was already seated, glasses halfway down his nose, shuffling papers with the deliberate calm of someone preparing to detonate something. I sat across from my parents. Ryan leaned back in his chair, spinning a pen, one leg flung over the other like we were waiting for lunch at a diner. He didn't even glance at me. I looked around the room and tried to summon that one afternoon with Grandpa, the one where we sat on the porch cataloging books. He'd held my hand for a moment, looked out at the land and said, "You don't need to own soil to have roots. But if I've got land, Claire, I'd like you to have a stake in it." That memory held me like a seatbelt while Mr. Greaves began to read. As stipulated in the legal will and testament of William Morgan, he said, voice even, the estate, including the property in Estes Park, all agricultural assets, and the family trust, is hereby transferred in full to Mr. Ryan Morgan. The air didn't move. My breath stayed put in my chest, trapped between hope and humiliation. The inheritance excludes all other descendants, he continued, in accordance with the Morgan family's succession tradition. There it was. Legal erasure. Not even a trinket. Not even my name. I stared at the papers on the table, at the neat spacing between clauses, the way words like exclusive and heir sat like granite. Greaves turned the page, kept reading, but I didn't hear any more. I was busy counting all the things I wasn't. Dad didn't flinch. Ryan is the rightful heir, he said, as if he were reminding the room of something obvious. Mom smoothed her scarf, not looking at me. It doesn't mean we love you any less. I almost laughed. The kind of laugh that might rattle a chandelier. I turned to Ryan, searching his face for something, remorse, embarrassment, even amusement. But his eyes were fixed on the table. Not once did he look at me. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he knew what I knew. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small brass key, the one Grandpa had given me when I was 12. For the side door, he'd said, "So you always have a way in." I placed it on the table gently. No drama. No speech. Then I stood. My voice didn't crack. "Thank you," I said to no one in particular, and walked out. The hallway outside felt cooler. I pressed the elevator button, stared straight ahead, trying not to count the seconds. When the doors opened, I stepped in and faced forward, my reflection looking back at me in the polished steel. As the doors were closing, I heard my father's voice, soft, casual, too careless to be cruel. Good thing Ryan never told her what really happened. The elevator descended like nothing had changed. But something had. Something irreversible. And I didn't need to know what really happened to know exactly where I stood. I didn't cry. Not this time. I started building. The streamers danced lazily in the breeze, catching little flickers of sunlight like strands of tinsel. Jordan stood on a stepladder in the corner of the backyard, adjusting the hand-painted banner that read Happy 5th Birthday, Sophie and Ethan. The letters were a little uneven, but the paint was bright, and the kids thought it was perfect. I was standing by the table, arranging plastic cups next to the lemonade pitcher, when Sophie ran past me in a blur of green cardboard and giggles. Her dinosaur crown had slid to one side of her head, and Ethan was chasing her with a foam T-Rex tail sticking out of the back of his shorts. They were chaos and magic, rolled into two small humans who didn't know what it meant to be unwanted. The table was a mess of frosting stains and gift wrap. There were paper plates half covered in cake crumbs and a box of temporary tattoos shaped like fossils. Jordan came down from the ladder, brushing glitter from his fingers. "They're going to remember this," he said, smiling. "That's the point," I replied, reaching to fix Sophie's crown as she sped by again. Memories worth keeping. Mrs. Helen from next door dropped in with a strawberry pie and a kind smile. "You know," she said, watching the twins roll down the grassy slope, "I've lived next to a lot of families. But I've never seen a mother who shows up like you do." I laughed, though a lump caught in my throat. I hadn't had a mother who showed up. So I'd made one up. Helen patted my arm. "Well, whoever you modeled her after, she raised you right." It wasn't long after she left that I heard it. 3 slow knocks at the front door. Not urgent, not casual. Just waiting. I glanced at Jordan. He was collecting empty juice boxes from the porch steps, but he looked up when he heard the sound. I handed him the pie knife and walked to the door, wiping my hands on my jeans, not thinking anything yet. I opened it. There they were. My parents stood like ghosts from an old story, too sharply dressed for a backyard birthday party. Dad held a teddy bear with a neat blue ribbon tied around its neck. Mom clutched a bouquet of tulips, the same kind blooming in the planter boxes by the fence. "We heard you have twins," she said, her voice too smooth, like it had been rehearsed in the car. I didn't answer right away. Behind me, I could still hear the kids shouting about velociraptors and jelly beans. I stepped aside, not to invite them in, but just enough to block the threshold with politeness. "You can sit on the porch," I said. "I'll bring tea." They nodded like guests who knew they had already overstayed something. I moved through the kitchen with quiet hands. The kettle clicked on. Cups were placed on a tray without noise. I knew this dance. I'd lived in silence long enough to learn its choreography. When I returned, they were seated stiffly on the wicker bench. Dad set the teddy bear down between them like a peace offering. I placed the tray on the table and poured the tea, then sat across from them, straight-backed. "It's lovely here," Mom said, scanning the garden. "So peaceful." "It is," I said. Dad cleared his throat. "We miss you, Claire." I tilted my head. "You miss your legacy." They blinked, caught, but didn't correct me. I kept my tone even. "You had a daughter who built a life without asking you for a cent. And you erased her." "It's not like that," Mom said quickly. "Then what is it like?" I asked. They exchanged a glance. Then Dad looked down at the steaming cup and said, "Ryan's not planning to have children. Ever." There it was. The reason for the flowers. The bear. The smiles. I nodded slowly. So now I matter, because your golden child broke? Silence followed. It wasn't angry or loud, just hollow. I stood. The kids are still playing. You should go before they ask who you are. They didn't protest. Just gathered the untouched cups, the bear, the bouquet. I didn't watch them leave. Inside, I found Jordan kneeling beside the kids, applying a sticker of a triceratops to Ethan's arm. Sophie held out her hand next, grinning. As I leaned against the doorframe, I thought about something I used to believe, that people always come back because they've changed. But sometimes they come back because they've run out of places to go. And not everyone who knocks deserves to be let in. I was replying to belated thank you messages after my birthday party when Heather's email popped up like a crack in the cheerful background. Subject: Need to talk. About your brother. I read the subject line over and over again, absently touching the rim of my warm coffee mug. Heather Lane. The name took me back years, to senior study groups, the smell of mint chocolate from her chewing pen, and the last time we'd spoken, graduation night. She'd said she was going into accounting. I didn't think I'd hear from her again, especially about Ryan. A day later, we met at a coffee shop by Lake Loveland. Spring had made the lake sparkle like stained glass. The breeze was light. Jazz blared from the small speakers. Heather was older, her blonde hair tied back, her eyes framed by black-rimmed glasses. But Heather was still straightforward, precise, and unhurried. "Do you still drink cold brew?" she asked, handing me a glass of iced coffee. Still, I smiled. "And you remember. We made small talk, work, the kids' lessons, hikes around Estes Park. But neither of us mentioned Ryan. Until Heather put down her bag and opened her tablet. "I didn't come here to stir up the past," she said, "but you need to know." I nodded. My heart wasn't exactly racing, just clenching, preparing. Ryan hired me to do the accounting for his blockchain company. The first few years were fine. Then, it became a mess. She slid a few pages of financial statements in front of me. The IRS's words loomed like a full stop. Delinquent balance. Payroll tax not remitted. Developers were leaving in droves, Heather continued, her voice even. Payrolls were delayed. Documents were not submitted on time. Then a funding round was canceled. I didn't know what to feel. Not surprised. But not gloating. Just silence. Your parents liquidated some of their land in Boulder. Their pension fund shares were sold. No inheritance left. I sat still, sipping my coffee, not tasting anything. So they came back. Heather looked at me. "Not because they missed you. They were hedging." I turned on my phone, scrolling through an old text I'd sent Ryan over a year ago. "Hey. You okay?" The text was still there. Read. Unanswered. I quietly locked the screen. Heather pulled out a stack of paper files. I don't mean to get personal, but she set them on the table. "This is the bankruptcy filing. And this is the part one don't understand." She pointed to the mismatched expenses, the dubious expense lines, the numbers hidden between the lines. "He used a middleman to transfer the money," Heather said quietly. "There were even signs of withdrawals from your parents' accounts. No one signed off." I didn't ask any more. There was nothing more to verify. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't irrational. They had made a bet. And made the wrong choice. Heather paused. "I've been thinking about cutting ties with my dad, too. Nothing major. It's just, he doesn't see me for who I am. He just sees me as something he needs to save his image." I took Heather's hand gently. We didn't cry. We just sat in silence, like people who had learned to survive without comfort. On the way home, I stopped at the park by the lake. The smell of damp grass and cherry blossoms lingered in the air. I sat on a bench, opened Heather's email again, then closed it. I didn't need to read it again. There are truths that, once confirmed, don't hurt. They just make you feel better. Because in the end, it wasn't that they erased me from their lives. It was that they bet on the wrong child. The desk lamp hummed like the lingering whisper of an old memory that would not be silenced. I sat in my small office, my laptop open, its soft blue light spilling over my papers and my cold cup of tea. The screen displayed the subject line. Subject: termination of contact and asset severance. I reread each sentence, not to edit it anymore, just to make sure I had said what I needed to say, no more, no less. I don't write this out of spite. I write to establish boundaries. You taught me that love comes at the cost of obedience. I will not teach that to my children. I had hidden my scholarship letter in my closet for fear of losing the small glimpse my family had of me. Now I applied through a lawyer, no longer afraid of being seen or not being seen anymore. I had learned that invisibility can sometimes be a form of freedom if you choose to step outside of it. Jordan walked in, barefoot on the cold wooden floor. He held a cup of chamomile tea, which he set down beside me without saying anything. He just sat there, his hand resting on the back of my chair like a steady support. I clicked send. There was a whoosh. No excitement. No tears. Just silence, like a room that had just been cleared. My attorney, Teresa Lynn, responded with a terse email. Received. I'll handle any future communications. You don't need to say anything. I closed the phone and pulled the thin blanket over my legs. The yellow light reflected on Jordan's face. He understood without asking. We sat there for a few minutes in silence, the soft wind outside the window and the steady breathing of the children in the next room. I thought about what I had lost, not the land, not the shares. It was the childish fantasy that you could change someone if you loved them enough. I know now, love isn't about trying to be accepted. It's about knowing when to stop, to stay human. I opened the copy of the letter again, attached to the termination document, clear, legal, irreversible. There are doors in life that don't need to slam shut. Just pull the latch gently and walk away. The last email I sent to my parents was only 7 lines. Short, firm, and cold enough. All further communications will be directed to my attorney. Please don't send gifts, letters, or notes. I wish you well. But my family is complete. I press send. No response. No understanding. Because justice didn't shout this time. It just quietly closed the door. It wasn't quite dawn yet. The pale light crept quietly through the curtains, covering the wooden floor in a pale yellow carpet. I walked over to the kids' bed. Sophie was curled up like a kitten, and Ethan was turned sideways, his feet propped up on a torn stuffed dinosaur. I pulled the covers over them both, adjusted the slightly askew pillow, and leaned down to whisper a silent promise. You'll never have to beg for love. Yesterday was still there, balloons not yet deflated, ribbons dangling from the porch. The scent of strawberry cake still hung in the air, mixed with the scent of tulips Jordan had placed in a vase by the door. I stepped out onto the porch, where Jordan was already sitting with 2 cups of hot coffee. He gave me a wordless look, as if he understood everything. No need to recount, no need to explain. We sat there like that, silently drinking coffee while the world was still awake. I opened my phone, an old habit. There was a new email from Heather. You did the right thing. I would do the same. Maybe for the first time in years, we're both choosing ourselves. I read it slowly, then deleted it from my inbox. Not because I was angry or cold. I just didn't need to keep the traces of my past hurt. I opened my contacts, found dad and mom, and deleted those too. As gently as removing a bandage that no longer stuck only by habit. Jordan put his hand on my shoulder. No more words needed to be said. The people who had made me feel like a shadow no longer existed in the mirror of my mind. I saw myself more clearly, a mother, a wife, a woman who no longer needed validation from anyone. No tears. No sighs. Just the feeling of breathing a little deeper, as if the air had suddenly expanded in my chest. The children are still asleep in their rooms. The little house is as peaceful as a bird's nest after a storm. No one knocks at the door at dawn to bring the past. No more false apologies to be demanded. I did not inherit the land. I did not inherit the bitterness. Some people inherit trauma. Others pass it on. I choose neither. There are peaceful mornings when I watch my children sleep and realize I no longer have to prove anything to the past. The silence of the past made me think I was not good enough, but now I know. The most important thing is not to be recognized, but to live up to your values. We cannot choose where we are born, but we can choose how we will live. If we grow up without love, then giving love in the right way to the next generation is an act of courage. In life, sometimes doors have to close so that better doors can open, whether in the heart or the home. If this story touches something in your past or in your heart, I hope you will leave a few lines to share. Who knows, your strength today will also give strength to others on a peaceful morning like this.